There is no hero's welcome for Peter Housty. Just a lonely walk to the ferry in an oversized jacket someone gave him.
There you go. Have a good day.
Housty is taking us back to the residential school where he says he was physically and sexually attacked for 9 years.
It feels like I'm going to scream and yell and cry my guts out. After coming out of treatment, I haven't gone back there. This is the first time since the treatment since I went back to Alert Bay.
It's a terror shared by thousands of former students who received an apology from then Prime Minister Stephen Harper in 2008.
Order, à l'ordre. J'invite les honorables.
The residential school apology was supposed to kick off a new era of reconciliation in Canada. And signal a better relationship with Indigenous peoples, like Housty.
The Government of Canada built an educational system in which very young children were often forcibly removed from their homes, often taken far from their communities. Many were inadequately fed, clothed, and housed. All were deprived of the care and nurturing of their parents, grandparents, and communities. Today we recognize that this policy of assimilation was wrong, has caused great harm, and has no place in our country.
I was excited for the first week. Got to know the people that were looking after the school. They were basically beating the crap out of other kids. We were hit with real long straps. They were like so, and they put salt and pepper on both of your hands, and you have no flesh on your hands, no skin. All you have is flesh. Now that's all you were able to see was just the skin or the meat on your hands, and it was bleeding.
The students called it St. Mike's. It was one of about 150 schools used to educate Indigenous children across the country in what Canada later admitted was an aggressive assimilation program.
There's more of beatings and a lot of sexual abuse there, and it was an ongoing thing. It was like a 24-hour thing, 7 days a week, 24/7. If you didn't do what they told you to do, it put you in a hospital or...
Churches ran the schools on the government's behalf. About 150,000 children went through the system for over 100 years. That's why the apology was so important. It legitimized survivors' experiences and officially acknowledged the trauma that occurred there.
I see so many images of things that actually went on there. Like, say, for example, people that actually got buried on that island. And I'm talking about kids that actually got buried on that island. It's shallow graves. People that actually killed themselves because of the beatings, the sexual abuse.
The apology was part of the Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement, the biggest out-of-court settlement in Canada's history. It was negotiated by a team from the Assembly of First Nations, led by Phil Fontaine, a residential school survivor and former national chief.
For our parents, our grandparents, great-grandparents, indeed for all of the generations which have preceded us, this day testifies to nothing less than the achievement of the impossible. For the generations that will follow us, we bear witness today in this House that our survival as First Nations peoples in this land is affirmed forever.
Working on that negotiating team was NA Chief Bill Erasmus. He says the apology very nearly didn't happen.
We know that the Prime Minister did not want to apologize in Parliament. He wanted to apologize in a different setting. He wanted to do it in just in a meeting hall. And we said no. Our elders insisted that it be in Parliament. We pushed back, and people like Phil Fontaine, the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, did not know until 20 minutes before it actually happened that he was able to speak in front of Parliament.
The horrors of Canada's residential schools were covered up for more than a century. No one wanted to take responsibility or be on the hook financially. Ray Mason was one of the first survivors to broker for compensation with the government.
They expected us to know something about records, and we had never had the records to start off with, and we never knew about records.
Mason led a grassroots organization in Manitoba that wanted survivors compensated simply for being survivors. He didn't think it was fair to make them testify in court or prove their story in any way.
I always said that we should never have to prove that we're put in those institutions.
People were denied for years and years that this actually happened. And it really messed up a lot of our former students, because they knew that things happened in those mission schools, those hostels, those residences.
Housty's parents and grandparents were also sent to St. Mike's, but they couldn't talk about it.
Because they went through residential school and saw the same thing happen to them when they went to school. And abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse.
After the apology, it was like the dam broke.
Well, some former students have spoken positively about their experiences at residential schools. These stories are far overshadowed by tragic accounts of the emotional, physical, and sexual abuse and neglect of helpless children.
It was suddenly okay to say you were a residential school survivor. And that's why you and your community were so damaged.
And that was when Canada and the churches finally agreed that this is real, and that there were wrongs done, and that they were prepared to settle. And many people say that they probably wouldn't have provided the compensation if they weren't compelled to.
The government and the churches agreed to pay $4 billion. This would fund the 5 terms of the settlement agreement: the apology, compensation for survivors, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, various commemoration projects, and health and wellness initiatives. Compensation was split into two parts. First was a Common Experience Payment, or CEP, for all students, $10,000 for the first year and $3,000 for each year of school after that. Housty received $34,000. Then he applied for the second part, the Independent Assessment Process, or IAP. Compensation for serious physical and sexual abuse. Survivors' damages were valued between 1 and 5 using this scale that came to be known as the meat chart.
I'm hurt for the rest of my life. They didn't understand. In the school, in the hostel, got beaten up for every wrong we did.
I was looking at the window, very homesick.
It has been difficult work. It has been difficult emotionally.
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission put survivors back in the spotlight.
Many survivor stories remain difficult to hear.
Everybody's going on a healing journey.
But we cannot permit discomfort to prevent us from accepting the truth.
Even though it's had its challenges, I think it's been a fair process. There's still very well, thank you.
So Phil Fontaine was feeling confident that reconciliation was back on track. Understandably, survivors wanted some schools torn down, like St. Mike's. But what about those left behind? Like some survivors in northwestern Ontario.
I had a survivor come to me, and he's in his 70s now. And he said, Garnet, I finally have enough strength to go for the compensation package. And I said, you know, sorry, but you missed the deadline for the IAP. It's over. And so he said to me, you mean I missed the boat? He said, yeah, you did, sadly and unfortunately, yeah, you did. And then and he said, you know, he looked at me really seriously and he said, you know how difficult it was to open up old wounds, tell my story for nothing.
Charlie Angus is the Member of Parliament for Timmins James Bay in northeastern Ontario. He is the one who confirmed Canada withheld evidence that would help thousands of survivors from St. Anne's Residential School in his riding obtain compensation. The Harper government was in power at the time.
They had the evidence, they were sitting on it in the Justice Department, and yet they provided these evidence narratives that lied and said there was no evidence of sexual or physical abuse in the history of St. Anne's.
Survivors told adjudicators St. Anne's was one of the most brutal schools in the country, with a homemade electric chair. But their IAP claims were denied.
We had people who had been victimized, who had been told that their stories weren't credible, who were traumatized going back in those processes. Some attempted suicide. There was an incredible fallout from what they endured in those hearings.
Frustrated so many survivors were falling through the cracks, Anja Kaneb wrote this call to review the settlement agreement and sent it to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
While there have been many successes to celebrate in the implementation of the agreement, it is imperative that survivors feel that it has truly been a fair and just resolution that facilitates the journey of healing and reconciliation for them and for non-Aboriginal Canadians. Otherwise, there can be no consequential or meaningful reconciliation.
He was surprised and a little saddened when the government rejected his request.
I got a letter from an assistant from Carolyn Bennett's office. It said, "Thank you for your letter. We do from time to time review aspects of the agreement, and there's no need for overall comprehensive review of the settlement agreement. And thank you for writing." So I just left it at that.
Survivors had 5 years to file an IAP claim before the deadline expired in 2012. Figures supplied by the adjudicator's office show 38,098 survivors applied, 27,324 received compensation, and 7,717 claims were rejected for various reasons.
From the beginning, there were concerns that the federal government, as the defendant, also having the oversight power and also having the responsibility to provide evidence, that there was a conflict of interest. When I see what's happened with St. Anne's and the deliberate obstruction of the rights of survivors, suppressing evidence, I can't believe that the federal government just had it in for the St. Anne's survivors. I cannot accept that that has happened to so many people whose only crime was that they were Indian children.
I know that this is something that's important in our school and something we've talked about before. So today I'd like you to give Mr. Kiewitz a very warm welcome. He is a survivor of residential school. He is not a victim. He's a survivor. And the difference is that he's not letting that stop him. He is trying to forgive and grow and move on. He's surviving this horrible thing that happened to him.
I was known as number 70. I was known as Andrew, my Christian name. The Roman Catholic baptized me Andrew Cuisance.
As Canadians wonder what comes next, Andrew Cuisance tells his story to another group of students.
And that when I was first come here, I was a savage. Excuse me for 1 minute. I shed a tear once in a while. I get emotional. I'm not ashamed to cry. I don't go there to point fingers. I don't go there to blame people. I go there to tell them the truth. And hopefully we can reconcile. You know, I gotta go back 50 years. Tell that boy he'd never done nothing wrong. He was a happy boy one time.
How old were you when you left?
15 going on 16. That's when my life just started to be ugly. Yep.
How old were you when you went there for the first time?
When I went to the residential school, 1958. I was born in 1954. My birthday is October 7th, 1954. And I entered residential school in 1958. Do your math.
4 years old.
Just about 4 years old.
It was around the time of the apology. This survivor walked into a small school division office in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, and said, "Use me."
It's the history of Canada that's never been told. It's been a hidden secret for years. Canada's hidden secret, and now it's been exposed. And now I go into schools and try and use it as a teaching tool, so the young people can understand and relate to one another. That legacy of my life, I want to leave.
And now I see Andrew coming and spreading the message to children.
Yes, like so sometimes we've done it like
Yeah.
your story makes me tear up.
It's okay.
And he still brings some of that sadness and that fear and that anger and that hurt, but he has also shown forgiveness and growth. And as I mentioned to the kids, he's not a victim of residential schools. He is a survivor of residential schools and is moving forward and helping the rest of us learn how to be better people and how to make a better world.
So what will be the legacy of the settlement agreement?
Never again will students be told that this is not an integral part of everything we are as a country.
I expect that in everything that I say, I will remind people of what it is that we heard, of some of the things that the survivors have reminded us and the elders who advised us have told us about, because those things don't easily leave you.
The TRC's 94 calls to action. The missing children Peter Housty says are buried on Alert Bay. The abusers we all know weren't prosecuted. Or the survivors who slipped between the cracks.
And sometimes we forget, I know I do, that there are people who are at the ground level that are truly hurting and that are in need of compensation and redress. And I'm talking about survivors who are illiterate, that can't read and write, that don't understand the process. They're silenced. They're the voice, they're the weakened voice. And who really, truly represents them?